We'd like to welcome you to 30-Minute Mondays webinar series, combining urine and oral fluid drug testing. Today's host is Bill Current from the Current Consulting Group.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and welcome everybody to yet another in the 30-minute webinar series from OraSure Technologies. We're going to be talking about a very important and hot topic right now, how to combine urine testing and oral fluid testing in the same program. And I first want to just give a shout out to OraSure for hosting. They do monthly webinars anyways, but over the last several weeks and for several weeks more to come, they've been hosting 30-minute Monday webinars to hit a single topic with guest speakers. And so today we're going to have, well, before I get to that, let me just give a plug for next week's webinar. 30-minute Monday webinar presentation will be Safety Sensitive Workplaces and Oral Fluid Testing, May 8th. And the co-speaker will be Judy Swartley from Red Planet Testing. We'll be off Memorial Day, Monday the 25th, but we'll be back June 1st for POCT and lab-based oral fluid testing combined. And that'll be with Brandon Williams from OraSure. Today's co-presenters with me will be Lori Jantz. Lori's a sales manager with OraSure Technologies. She's been in the business for over 20 years now. She supports the Northeast Territory, but she's also manages the inside sales team. So she's pretty busy all the time. And with Lori will be Amy Weimer. Amy is an inside sales account manager with OraSure. She's got over 15 years of experience in drug and alcohol testing with oral fluid testing. So welcome Lori and Amy to today's webinar presentation on combining oral fluid and urine testing in the same program. So as we get started, let me share just a few statistics real quickly to lay the groundwork. Substance abuse before, during, and after the pandemic. So we've done entire presentations on these statistics, and I've sort of put everything on just one slide real quickly. The percentage of the population in 2018 who used illicit drugs in the year prior to the survey, this was done by the federal government, was 19.4%, higher than the percentages in 2015, 2016, and 2017. In other words, substance abuse was on its way up when the pandemic hit. During the pandemic, most states that have some type of legal marijuana law, whether for recreational use or medicinal use, have deemed cannabis to be an essential medicine. That's the terminology they're using, an essential medicine during the pandemic. And one source that tracks marijuana sales showed that sales were up, store revenue was up between 52 and 130%, depending on where in the country we were talking about, compared to January. So compared to last year, certainly we expect to see dramatic increases because a number of additional states legalized marijuana, but we're just comparing March and April to January of this year, up 52 to 130%. And sales of alcoholic beverages, everything from wine and beer to liquor, up 55% in the week ending March 21st. After the pandemic's over, we know that substance abuse will continue to remain far above what it was before the pandemic. In a study that was done just after 9/11 back in 2001, 30% of Manhattan residents said they drank more alcohol, smoked more cigarettes, and used more marijuana in the first month after 9/11, and that number only came down slightly to 27% 6 months later. So there's a great need for employers to continue doing drug testing now during the pandemic as the economy starts to open up again, and certainly, on an ongoing basis. And there are different testing methods available. There's urine testing through a laboratory, there's point of collection testing, there's hair testing, there's lab-based oral fluid testing, which of course was endorsed by the federal government back in October when they issued final guidelines for lab-based oral fluid testing. And then there's also point of collection or instant result oral fluid testing. And there's lots of questions that come up when you consider one testing method versus another. I've just got one slide I'm going to show you among the many different things that you have to take into consideration and really understand. This is the window of detection depending on the different sample that you're using for your drug testing. So you see blood, which is very, very uncommon, of course, for workplace drug testing, and oral fluid all the way to the left, and then urine some hours after use of drugs, the window of detection opens, but it stays open a little bit longer than oral fluid. And then hair testing takes days before the window of detection opens, but it stays open for 2-3 months after that. This is just one of the many key areas that you have to really study and understand as you make a decision between urine testing and oral fluid testing. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We received a lot of questions from the people who registered for the presentation today. And so we're going to try to get to all of those questions. And please continue to submit your questions during today's presentation. We're going to go quickly because we've only got 30 minutes. But if you do have questions and we don't get to them, we will be sending out answers to all the questions, those that were submitted ahead of time, as well as the ones that we can't get to today. We'll be submitting those to you in the follow-up emails that come to you as a person who attended today's webinar. So Lori and Amy, are you ready to go?
You sure
We
are.
are ready.
Okay. So first of all, let's just start with a very general question. Why would a company want to consider utilizing both oral fluid and urine testing in the same program?
Sure, Bill, I'll start with that one if that sounds good, Amy. Ultimately, all drug testing comes down to achieving specific objectives for an organization. So therefore, the choice of the testing method really should be driven by determining the method that will most likely create a successful outcome, just like you referenced the slide with the graph. So overall, we want to support whatever objectives that employer identifies ahead of time. What we do know, though, is adding oral fluid testing to a current urine program can bring many advantages. Mixing things up, creating an element of surprise to a current program is always a good thing. Definitely throws off maybe there's new applicants coming in. We know that oral fluid captures what we consider impairment or under the influence with a different window of detection offered by urine. So again, no right or wrong. It's just looking at something different than what urine may have typically done for a program. And then the other element we always like to touch on is we know oral fluid will eliminate collection hassles, right? Especially for more rural areas. For many of us right now, they're all working remotely and can't necessarily get to a collection site. We know that oral fluid collections can occur in a variety of locations and really just eliminate many collection issues found with urine. So with that, it's definitely employers that may even be on the webinar with us today may find that these times collection sites are closed or they just don't really want to put their employees in a situation they don't have to be in. It's a good time to maybe consider oral fluid to enhance their current program.
So for many, many years, lab-based urine testing has sort of been the king of the hill. That's the majority of workplace drug testing is lab-based urine testing. And we've seen sort of an encroachment on that market share over the years as the federal government was in the process of developing and then finally issuing final regulations for oral fluid testing. So why would a company not just choose to go with oral fluid or choose to stay with urine? Why would you want to convert, or why would you not just convert to one or the other?
That's a great question, Bill. Most importantly, what we have to realize is that it's a not one size fits all, and it's not an all or none type of drug testing program. Different testing methodologies can be used for different situations within your company. You might be looking for historical use, recent use, or immediate use within your workplace. So when you think about those three scenarios, you might want to consider, do you want to capture the recent drug use or a long-term lifestyle? Do you want to have immediate results, or would you like to send the specimens to a laboratory? And do you, as an employer, do you only want to focus on the bottom line? So there's a lot of different places and things that play into determining which testing methodologies you want to go with within your company. And we can see that by using the windows of detection, we can see how those different types of testing methodologies will show hours, days, weeks, or months of drug use within the individual.
So you both sort of referred to this, and maybe it would be a good time to skip ahead to this question that we've received from the audience, which is why is the oral fluid window of detection, why is that way over to the left? In other words, why does it become possible to detect drugs in oral fluid so quickly where it takes more time for urine and hair to show the drug?
Sure, I'll take that one, Bill. And Amy, feel free to add on as well as we tag team. So, again, looking at this graph, this is one of my favorites for any of my partners or employers that might be on the line today. We use it a lot in the field because it demonstrates just that, where if an organization wants to get more of maybe a real-time snapshot of what might be going on with an applicant or an employer or even a drug treatment patient, oral fluid fits in really nicely because, as you touched on in the beginning, Bill, it's going to find out potentially within 15 minutes to hours, all the way out to days. And so when we compare and we're looking at the graphs together, we know it correlates very closely with blood. And then taking that step further, a lot of programs will want to maybe enhance and look at a little bit further, and they're going to look at that urine testing to complement a program. So again, for the purposes of today's call, as much as we'd love everybody to be converting over to oral fluid, we know that it makes sense to look at a program's goals overall. And then again, we don't run into hair testing as much, but it's definitely industry specific, where hair testing will really do a great job of looking further out to days in more of that total lifestyle of an actual donor, looking at all the way out to months.
So let me interject then. If you can tell that if in an oral fluid sample you can detect drugs within minutes, you said 15 minutes after somebody has used the drug, then it would seem to me that that would be ideal, say, for in the workplace for reasonable suspicion or post-accident, when you want to know, how recently did the person use the drugs? I mean, that's the impression I'm getting.
You're exactly right, Bill. That's exactly right.
Right, when you want to find out if they're truly under the influence during the time of the accident or during that scenario, you would want to have a drug test that would show you that recent usage.
Okay, so that might be perfect in a state, for example, that's legalized marijuana, and there's some restrictions on sort of lifestyle testing methods, and somebody comes back into the workplace and they smell of marijuana. You do an oral fluid test and you're more likely to get a positive if they use the drug within the last hour or so, versus urine, where it takes a few hours before the drug becomes detectable in the urine sample. That's very interesting. Now, these next two bullets refer to the, addressing having both testing methods in the same policy and state law issues. What would you say to a company that, say, is doing urine testing now, but they want to add oral fluid? They want to keep their urine testing, they want to add oral fluid testing. Should they address that in their policy? Is there some consideration they need to make there?
Sure. In fact, Bill, you helped me firsthand recently with a third-party administrator, and I know the inside sales team as well. Amy has had questions come up specifically of, we don't write policies at OraSure, but we like to give guidance, as you mentioned, to those that are considering it. So we want to make sure that we're giving them the facts. And overall, we know that a successful program includes, as you mentioned, the policy. It includes the training if they're adding oral fluids, overall testing, and then obviously the discipline and enforcement of it. But an employer's policy should really clearly state all forms of the potential testing options. And you broke it down very easily for me, and I'll reference for the group with regard to a comprehensive policy. There's three kind of subsections, if you will, that make it really easy to add oral fluid testing to a urine program. And they highlight first what type of drug testing, how the drug testing is conducted, and then the when of the drug testing is conducted. So the what type, the how, and then the when. And then while adding or maybe switching to oral fluid testing would affect all three of these sections, it's really not a complex update to policy, right? It's just more of just making sure if it's in there or not. So for instance, section 1 of this policy could reflect something along the lines of, if they wanted to add lab-based oral fluid testing, the language would read something like, the company utilizes urine and oral fluid samples to conduct drug testing. I know we work with a lot of organizations that maybe historically haven't referred to their policy for a while, or maybe unfortunately something has happened for them to kind of revisit it. And we find that typically it's kind of maybe cornered a little bit to one methodology. So we just want to give guidance with the partners that we work with to make sure that the company really opens that up to all methodologies that they want to add. And then subsection 2 could look something more like, again, getting back to the how, they could highlight the split specimen protocols, how samples are transported to laboratories, screening, the confirmation, MRO, results reporting, all that good stuff of how it's going to happen. and just making sure that a policy includes it both for urine as well as oral fluid. And then finally, with the section 3, we would want to highlight under what circumstances oral fluid would be used and what circumstances maybe urine would be used. So for an example, an oral fluid sample would be collected, as we touched on earlier, for post-accident, even reasonable suspicion, pre-employment drug tests. So kind of in the big picture, we know state drug testing laws, union agreements, all the corporate world that we have to live in, they're all impacted by the language and how an employer would want their policy to be worded. But overall, it's a simple, add-on to a policy, and we can definitely give good guidance. It's not something that we do directly, but we know the right people who do it.
Well, and I'll just add, I remember that question, Lori, from the client that you were talking about. And one of the points that we made was that lab-based oral fluid drug testing for workplace is permitted in 47 states already. So when SAMHSA came out with the mandatory guidelines for lab-based oral fluid testing, which applies to the federal government, we were already able to do lab-based oral fluid testing in almost every state, with the exception of Maine, Vermont, and Hawaii. And my prediction is now that the federal government's come out with these guidelines, we'll probably see some changes to the laws in those 3 states that makes it possible for employers to do lab-based oral fluid testing there as well. Let me combine these next 2 questions kind of together. So what are the key attributes of oral fluid testing, and how do they compare to urine? And kind of roll into that how the 2 methods compare in terms of accuracy, because I know that's very important to employers when they're considering which testing method to use. They want to make sure that it's going to produce accurate, legally defensible results. So let me roll those 2 together. What are the key attributes of oral fluid testing? How do they compare to urine, including accuracy?
Thanks, Bill. I will take that one. As for their accuracy, generally lab-based testing methods produce highly accurate results. So whether that's with oral fluid or with urine, but much also depends on the testing process. So for lab-based testing procedures, very accurate results because of the sensitivity, the ability to detect a true positive, and the specificity, the ability to detect a true negative, are extremely high. These sensitivity and specificity levels vary with rapid result testing devices because they're typically not quite as high as a lab-based testing. So lab-based results also produce quantitative results, meaning a result that indicates accurately how much of the drug is detectable within a person's system. And a rapid result on a device produces a qualitative result of a yes, they were positive, or no, they were negative. So then we can tie that into the key attributes of oral fluid testing and how they compare with urine. So for oral fluid, you have a little bit more flexibility for collecting the sample and determining whether that flexibility is best for urine or oral fluid. It also gives you more versatility. So with your oral fluid collections, they can occur in a variety of locations. It can be out on a job site. It can be in an office environment. There's no need for a bathroom. So it can pretty much be done anytime, anywhere. It also saves time with the oral fluid collections because they typically occur on or near the job site or the place of employment. So there's no need to send anyone off to a collection site or to a bathroom to collect their urine sample. And the versatility of detection, the oral fluid testing permits more interpretive insight into that recent drug use. So for cause testing or for post-accident, it really allows you to collect that sample then and there at the workplace.
Okay, so you've got the versatility in where the collection takes place. Well, I guess one of the thoughts that came to my mind, I know we didn't necessarily talk about this question, but it's one I think that's on many people's minds right now is, is it safe to send workers to a collection site to void a sample, whether it's urine or oral fluid or hair? And, what type of liability does the employer face if he or she is sending people to a collection site and, they end up becoming infected with the coronavirus, there may not be any way to prove that they became infected or exposed to the coronavirus while they were at the collection site. But I thought, Amy, you brought up a good point, which is companies are struggling right now to find collection sites that will provide the services that employers have typically relied on. An alternative would be oral fluid testing. And so I know this is on the next slide, but would one of you, maybe Lori, you could address like telehealth collections or remote video observed collections that we're hearing a lot about now, where the collector and the donor are not actually in the same place while the collection's taking place?
Sure, I'm happy to, Bill. Yeah, that's been a hot one lately. And I will say we are kind of holding on for the ride with everybody else of just doing our homework. And as we kind of uncover one solution, we hear of a new one coming out, the next day type thing. And so it's a lot of sharing best practices. But for those on the call, telehealth or video observed collections, as they're often called now, they can be done using a number of programs, right? So including Zoom, Skype, YouTube. Some of you may have seen us pushing out some information on LinkedIn regarding a new partner that we're working with. The app is called Proof, made by Recovery Truck. And that, again, allows that virtual collection, and it's all done through a phone app. So it's pretty wild just to kind of see the world that we're living in and how much it's changed in the last 90 days. And Bill, I know you and I have talked with regard to kind of what the future is going to bring with these collections. It's interesting because while some folks may be looking for a void to be filled right away and just have that interim solution, we're finding that a lot of these solutions that are being implemented are going to be some that are here to stay, right? So, these programs make it possible for a collector to fully observe every phase of an oral fluid collection, from whether it's a couple miles away or from across the country. And because the donor does not require the privacy of a bathroom or toilet stall with an oral fluid collection, that entire collection process can be observed, including opening the package, the insertion of that swab going right into the mouth. And we're finding all organizations are kind of making it what they need it to be. So for instance, we talked to some clients more in the drug treatment application where they've created more of maybe a shortened type of chain of custody form to meet that need. We have other more workplace environments where maybe they're reaching out to our lab partners and using more of an e-signature, DocuSign type of way of doing the chain of custody. So we are trying to just arm ourselves with all the information. In fact, I had just registered for a telehealth webinar myself for later this week just to kind of learn more because, we know this is a lot of new information for all of us, and we want to be able to be that resource for folks moving forward. I also think it's interesting, very quickly just to mention, we follow the guidance of a lot of the associations that we work with. And recently, the American Society of Addiction Medicine, ASAM, they mentioned the following guidance, just mentioning requiring patients to present to a healthcare facility to provide urine samples for urine testing may be more harmful than beneficial. Patients may unnecessarily increase their risk to exposure to the COVID virus. And then they further on just to suggest that treatment providers should explore options for drug testing at a distance, such as using oral fluid tests. So again, I think we're all just looking for that guidance in the short term as well as the long term, and making sure that we're, following the rules and checking the boxes. But it's just been a really interesting new area for us as it relates to oral fluid testing.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't want to sound like I'm promoting this Proof device that you talked about, but I did see a demonstration of it last week with an OraSure oral fluid test, and it was really quite remarkable. And as you talk about, what does the future of drug testing look like? I think the pandemic has sort of forced us all into sort of into the future a little bit faster. And we only have about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get to some of these additional questions. And then to the audience, I'll just say that we will have answers to all of these questions, as well as all the questions that you've submitted either prior to or during the presentation. Those will be sent out to you. And then if you have additional questions, you can email the current consulting group, and we'll get answers for you. So one of the things that's come up recently a lot as well is point of collection testing, and that, you go down to the second to last bullet. I said at the outset, you've got lab-based urine and oral fluid, but you also have point of collection urine and oral fluid testing. So what are the main differences? I mean, how would you sort of summarize the main differences between those two, other than the fact that one is a lab test and one's an on-site test?
Oh, I can take that question. The biggest difference between lab-based and instant oral fluid drug testing is, of course, where the initial analysis of the samples takes place. But with lab-based testing, the analysis, of course, takes place at a laboratory. And with a point-of-care device, it renders an initial screen with your results being either positive or not positive at the time of the reading of the device. If the instant test result is positive, the sample should be shipped to the laboratory for confirmation. So that's the biggest part, is with your lab-based testing, you mail that sample in for the processing at the laboratory to start. And with that instant test, you get the instant positive or not positive read right there on the spot, and then you need to send something in for a confirmation to be followed up by the laboratory and then also by the medical review officer. But the sample collection is very similar between the two methods, with both allowing the collector to observe the process from a safe distance. And again, a lot comes down to the quality of the rapid test that you would decide to choose.
Okay. And so let's say you're using one or the other, but you're looking at, well, let's say you're doing an oral fluid test, you get a positive. One of our attendees would like to know, can you screen with one type but confirm with another type? Can you screen with the oral fluid maybe and send a urine sample into a lab for a confirmation test, or vice versa?
I'd really say, Bill, for best practices, it's best to stay with the same sample type for both your screen and your confirmation.
Okay.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that you want to address that in your policy to make sure that your employees understand that. But what about, like, for example, the second bullet there says, is oral fluid a good match for reasonable suspicion post-accident? Of course, urine testing has been used for pre-employment, reasonable suspicion, random, etc. Does oral fluid, match up with those testing methods as well? Is there a time when you wouldn't use an oral fluid test? And I guess that's sort of a loaded question for two sales reps from OraSure, but how would you address that?
Sure, and I'll actually just maybe piggyback to Amy's comments. I always think real-world examples are helpful to the employers that are on the call with us today, and it's really case by case. So, for instance, an example that for an employee maybe that comes into work with red eyes, speaking very slowly, and just seems completely out of it. What would you use in that situation where they seem potentially stoned? Well, oral fluid, because it detects very recent use, right? That would be the perfect solution, where urine and hair may miss this in a reasonable suspicion or cause situation. But then in contrast, if an accident occurs in the warehouse and there's a forklift and a driver, running into a pallet and just total chaos, what would you use? Well, you could use oral fluid again for that detect very recent use. Urine and hair may miss this in the post-accident situation. But then we know in a situation where there's a regulated market, we know that lab-based urine test, and they have to comply with the DOT mandated testing, that's going to be the alternative testing method. So really, it's just important to kind of look back overall of what the objectives of a policy, wants to gain.
Let me just say we're just about out of time. We got a lot of questions. We're going to respond to all the questions in writing, and everybody on today's webinar will get all the answers to all the questions. One of the questions was, can you describe the collection process for oral fluid? And I had this slide prepared, and I know we're sort of out of time now, but you can see the easy sort of 1, 2, 3 process of the oral fluid collection. Let me just close by saying this, because this came up in some of the questions as well. Going forward, we know that lab-based oral fluid testing is legal in almost every state, and we expect that will be in every state in the next year or two. 47 states right now permit it, and that the federal government's endorsed it. And so I think you're gonna see a lot of companies that have been doing urine testing for many, many years, looking at combining the two testing methods and sort of getting the best out of both. I think that DOT will also come out with regulations for lab-based oral fluid testing. deferring, of course, to SAMHSA's guidelines for the technical aspects of it, and DOT's already signaled that they're going to do that. But I think you're going to see a lot more companies doing both oral fluid and urine testing in the future. And I think the situation that we're all finding ourselves in the United States and throughout the world is sort of pushing us forward on these issues a little quicker, like the remote video observed collections. That's just picking up steam. I was talking to a company just last week where they were doing about, this was a provider, but where they're doing about 1,000 a week now. And so that's a ton. I mean, nobody had heard of it, sort of relatively just a few weeks ago, and now, and all of those are with oral fluid. So I think you're going to see a combination of the two and some sort of innovative ways of getting collections done and getting results back. So, but with that, I want to thank Lori Jantz and Amy Weimer from OraSure Technologies for being our co-presenters today. If you have any questions, please reach out to Intercept. You see their contact information there at the bottom of the screen. You will get these slides as well, but you're going to get the answers to the questions more importantly. And we want to remind you about next week's 30-minute Monday webinar, Safety Sensitive Workplaces and Oral Fluid Testing, and our speaker will be Judy Swartley from Red Planet Testing Technology. So with that, thank you for joining us today, and this concludes today's webinar presentation.